I'm Tony, aged 56. I feel very unhappy, because today I knew my wife betrayed me with my nephew. Now I'm stumped on what to do: cheat on her with another woman, get revenge on my nephew, sue her and take back everything we've saved up for so long, or just walk away, but walk away for good. I'm faced with a difficult choice. Make yourself comfortable, I'll tell you the real story. My life once felt like a book whose ending I thought I knew. But recent events have scrambled the pages into chaos, revealing depths I had never imagined. I built my life like a fortress, brick by brick, hard work, family, climbing the career ladder. Now, as the director of a construction company, a man with silvering temples who thought he had a firm grip on everything, I've realized that the walls of my fortress are much thinner than I once believed. Laura, my wife, 12 years my junior at 44, had always been a source of pride. Her unique charm, a blend of Ukrainian vigor and American grace, radiated strength and beauty. With her fair skin, thick dark hair, and those deep brown eyes, she was not just my partner but a treasure that I feared to lose. Yet, lately, something had shifted. Her evenings out became more frequent, her explanations more evasive. Just meeting friends, or just capturing life through her lens, she'd say. But the shadows in her eyes told a different story. The subtle signs began to form a clearer picture. Her phone, once carefree and open, now a vault of secrets. Her gaze, once warm and inviting, now averted. I sensed a betrayal not yet confirmed but felt as sharply as a knife's edge. Compelled by a mix of fear and desperation, I decided to follow her one evening. She thought I was staying home, the lights left on as usual. But as soon as she drove away, I grabbed my coat and slipped into the night. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and anger as I tailed her car from a safe distance. She stopped at a small cafe, the very one where we had our first dates, now apparently a venue for her and someone else. As I watched from across the street, she entered alone. Minutes later, a man joined her, Liam, 46, confident, with dark hair and a muscular build, looking both familiar and out of place. It hit me then: he wasn't just any man, he was the son of my estranged brother, Daniel. The cafe, once a capsule of our shared memories, had turned into a stage for what looked like an intimate betrayal. They sat too close, their laughter too loud, her eyes not leaving his. The same eyes that once looked at me with love now shared whispers and smiles with another, her nephew. No less. Shocked and heartbroken, I retreated before being seen, the image of their closeness searing into my mind. Back in my car, the weight of what I had witnessed pressed down on me. How long had this been going on? What did Liam see in my wife, and what did she see in him? When Laura returned home that night, slipping quietly into bed, I lay awake, the room spinning with the ghosts of lies and half-truths. I knew then that the life I had built was on the verge of crumbling. But I also knew I couldn't let it fall without uncovering the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. My unease grew with each passing day, each more unsettling than the last. Laura's evenings out stretched longer, her explanations thinner. She cloaked her outings in vagueness: a quick meet with friends, an impromptu photo session, yet each excuse seemed more a fabrication than fact. It was a chilly evening in October when I decided I could no longer sit idly by, a spectator in my own life. The house felt empty, colder somehow, as I watched Laura prepare for another night out with friends. She dressed with care, a stark contrast to the casual indifference of our recent conversations. "Another photography club meeting?" I asked, the skepticism barely masked by my tone. Laura paused, her back to me. "Yes, something like that," she replied, her voice flat, dismissive. The simplicity of her lie stung more than I cared to admit. After she left, I waited only a few moments before grabbing my keys and following her. I knew the streets well, the back roads and shortcuts of our small town. I tailed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anger. She drove not to the bustling heart of downtown but to the quieter, dimly lit part of the city where quaint coffee shops and old bookstores stood shoulder to shoulder. She parked near the Cozy Bean, a cafe that we once frequented together in the early days of our romance. It was our spot, a place of whispered dreams and laughter. Now, it seemed, it was just another backdrop for whatever charade Laura was playing. From across the street, tucked away in the shadows, I watched as Laura met not with a group of photography enthusiasts, but with a single individual. A man, tall and confidently postured, approached her. Even from a distance, I could see the familiarity in their greeting. A hug that lingered a bit too long, smiles that were a bit too bright. The man was unfamiliar to me. his features obscured by the dim street lighting, but his presence sparked a fierce jealousy and a torrent of questions. Who was he? How long had this been going on? As they entered the cafe together, I felt a chill that wasn't from the autumn air. Something was profoundly wrong, and as I sat there, parked in the darkness, I knew this night would be a turning point. I couldn't continue to ignore the signs, the gnawing suspicion that had taken root in my heart. Determined to uncover the truth, I steeled myself for what would come next. I would confront Laura, demand answers, but not tonight. Tonight, I would watch and wait. For the first time in a long time, I felt a clarity of purpose. I wasn't just a betrayed husband, I was a man on the brink of reclaiming his life. The morning after my vigil at the cafe, I awoke with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. The image of Laura in the dim light, embracing a man who was not me, haunted my thoughts. The warmth of our early years seemed a distant memory, replaced by a cold, gnawing uncertainty. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The doubts, the suspicions, they were consuming me. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But Laura was as elusive as ever, carrying on as if nothing had changed, as if her secrets weren't tearing our marriage apart. Determined to confront the truth head-on, I waited until Laura left for another outing that evening. This time, I was prepared. I wasn't just going to follow her, I was going to confront her. The time for watching and waiting had passed. It was time for action. I followed her car through the winding streets once more, my heart pounding with each turn. She led me not to the cafe this time, but to a secluded park on the outskirts of town. A place we had once visited together, a place filled with memories of long walks and quiet conversations. Now, it was the stage for a different kind of encounter. From a distance, I saw her car pull into the empty lot, and my breath caught as another car pulled in beside hers. It was him, the man from the cafe. They exchanged a few words, then Laura got into his car, and they drove off into the darkness, leaving my world spinning. This was it, the undeniable proof that my worst fears were true. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else, a cold, steely resolve. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. If Laura thought she could deceive me, she was wrong. I trailed them carefully, my mind racing with possibilities. What would I do when they stopped? Confront them? Watch from the shadows? Every option felt inadequate, yet necessary. Finally, they pulled into a deserted lot behind a closed diner. The place was shrouded in darkness, the perfect setting for what they were about to do. I parked a short distance away and watched as they got out of the car. Laura and this man, this intruder into my life, disappeared into the back of the diner. Out of sight, my heart raced. I knew I had to make a choice. Would I burst in, exposing their betrayal? Or would I wait, gathering more evidence, making sure there was no doubt about what was happening? But as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about proving Laura's infidelity. It was about reclaiming my own sense of self, my own life. I wasn't just a victim, I was a man who deserved better. With that thought, I stepped out of the car. I wasn't sure what I would do next, but I knew one thing, I was done being passive. It was time to take back control. My footsteps were heavy as I approached the back entrance of the diner, the darkness around me seeming to close in with each step. My mind raced with images of Laura and the stranger inside, every possible scenario flashing before my eyes, each one more unbearable than the last. I paused for a moment at the door, my hand trembling slightly as it hovered over the handle. The cold metal sent a chill up my spine, but I pushed it aside. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The small hallway inside was dimly lit, the faint hum of a refrigerator the only sound in the stillness. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved quietly down the narrow corridor, every sense on high alert. The door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the darkness. I crept closer, my breath catching in my throat as voices reached my ears, low, murmured words, the sound of intimate conversation. My grip tightened on the doorframe as I peered inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the brightness of the room beyond. There they were, Laura and the man from the cafe, sitting too close on a worn leather couch, their bodies angled toward each other. The intimacy of their posture left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a casual meeting. It was something far more insidious. My vision blurred with anger as I stepped into the room, the sound of the door creaking open drawing their attention. Laura's eyes widened in shock as she saw me, her face draining of color. The man beside her straightened, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. Tony. Laura's voice was barely a whisper, her words faltering as she searched for an explanation. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't need her excuses, her lies. The truth was laid bare before me, and it was uglier than I had ever imagined. How long? The words came out harsher than I intended, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. How long have you been doing this behind my back? Laura flinched, the accusation hitting her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but the man beside her, Liam, as I now realized, cut her off. Tony, this isn't what you think, Liam began, his tone smooth, almost condescending. We were just, don't you dare try to explain this away, I spat, my anger flaring into something more dangerous. I'm not blind, Liam. I saw you together. I followed you here. How long has this been going on? Laura's gaze dropped to the floor, her silence more damning than any confession could have been. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. Finally, Laura looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Tony, I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice breaking. It just happened. It just happened? I echoed, disbelief lacing my words. You expect me to believe that this betrayal, just happened? Liam rose to his feet, moving to stand between us. A misguided attempt at mediation. Tony, listen, we can talk about this. There's no need to. But I wasn't listening. My focus was solely on Laura, the woman I had loved, the woman who had torn my world apart with a single act of betrayal. The sight of her now, tearful and regretful, did nothing to quell the storm inside me. Was it worth it, Laura? My voice was quieter now, the fury giving way to something colder, more calculated. Was this, whatever this is, worth destroying everything we had? Laura's silence was answer enough. My heart sank, the last vestiges of hope crumbling away. There was no going back from this, no fixing what had been broken. The marriage we had built, the life we had shared, it was all a lie. With a final, pained look at Laura, I turned and walked out of the room, the door slamming shut behind me. I didn't look back, there was nothing left to see. I drove through the night, the city lights blurring into a haze as my mind raced with thoughts of what had just transpired. The confrontation had left me raw, my emotions swirling in a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and confusion. But as the initial shock began to fade, a new resolve took its place. I needed answers, real answers, not the half-hearted excuses Laura had offered. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went, and why it had happened in the first place. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I found myself in my home office, surrounded by the remnants of a life I was no longer sure I understood. The walls were lined with photos, mementos of a marriage that now felt like a lie. I stared at them, the smiling faces frozen in time, a painful reminder of what I had lost. I knew that confronting Laura again wouldn't get me the answers I needed. She was too good at evading the truth, too practiced at covering her tracks. No, if I wanted the truth, I would have to find it myself. And that meant digging into the one place Laura seemed to think I would never look, her private life. I started with her phone. It was the key to so many of her secrets, the device that had once been so freely shared between us but had recently become a fortress of privacy. I had no qualms about going through it now. Whatever trust had existed between us was shattered. As expected, the phone was password protected. But I was persistent. After several failed attempts, I finally guessed the code, an old anniversary date. One she probably assumed I had forgotten. The irony was bitter. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through her messages, searching for any clue that could explain what had happened. There were dozens of texts from Liam, each one more damning than the last. They spoke of secret meetings, shared moments that were far too intimate for anything but an affair. But it wasn't just the content of the messages that caught my attention, it was the tone. The way Laura spoke to Liam was different. Softer, more vulnerable. It was a side of her that I hadn't seen in years, a side I had thought was reserved for me alone. As I delved deeper into the digital trail, I found emails, social media messages, even photos that confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just a fling, it was a full-blown relationship, one that had been going on for months, maybe even longer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. But amidst the avalanche of betrayal, something else caught my eye, a series of encrypted messages between Laura and an unknown number. They were short, cryptic, but the implications were clear. Someone else was involved in this, someone who was manipulating Laura and Liam, pulling the strings behind the scenes. My mind raced as I tried to piece it all together. Who was this third person, and what was their role in all of this? The messages hinted at blackmail, threats that had forced Laura into a corner, but the details were frustratingly vague. I needed more information, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. This was bigger than just an affair. It was a conspiracy, one that could destroy everything I had worked for if I wasn't careful. With a deep breath, I made a decision. I would find out who was behind this, and I would stop them, no matter what it took. But first, I needed help, someone who could dig deeper, someone who could uncover the truth without alerting Laura or Liam. It was time to call in a favor from an old friend, someone who owed me more than a few. As I reached for the phone, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the despair. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I stared at my phone, the screen illuminating the darkness of my study. The contact list scrolled past my eyes, a blur of names that once held meaning but now seemed distant, irrelevant. I needed someone who could dig deeper, someone who could uncover the truth without tipping off Laura or Liam. My finger hovered over a name, Frank. Frank had been a private investigator before he retired, a man with a nose for trouble and a knack for finding things that others wanted to keep hidden. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Frank had moved out to the suburbs to escape the chaos of city life. But if anyone could help me now, it was Frank. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered, thick with the remnants of sleep. Yeah? Frank's voice was gruff, familiar in a way that brought a fleeting sense of comfort. Frank, it's Tony, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need a favor, a big one. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. Tony, it's been years. What's going on? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. How could I explain the mess my life had become in just a few short days? But I knew there was no point in beating around the bush. It's Laura, I began, my voice low. She's seeing someone else. And it's not just an affair. There's something more going on, something I can't figure out on my own. I need your help. Another pause, longer this time. When Frank spoke again, his tone had softened, tinged with concern. All right, Tony, I'll help you, but you need to be ready for whatever we find. This kind of thing, it can get ugly. I swallowed hard. I know, but I have to do this, Frank. I need to know the truth. We agreed to meet the next day, at a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was a place we used to frequent when Frank was still working cases, a quiet spot where we could talk without being overheard. I spent the night turning over the events of the past few days in my mind. The pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, but there were still too many gaps, too many unanswered questions. When I arrived at the diner the next morning, Frank was already there, nursing a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked older, his hair grayer and his face more lined, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't dulled with time. Tony, Frank greeted me with a nod, motioning for me to sit. Let's get to work. I slid into the booth opposite Frank, my hands still trembling slightly. I don't know where to start, I admitted, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Start with what you know, Frank suggested, pulling out a small notepad. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told Frank about Laura's late-night outings, the man at the cafe, the confrontation at the diner, and the encrypted messages I had found on her phone. I laid it all out, every painful detail, and watched as Frank's expression darkened with each new revelation. When I finished, Frank leaned back in his seat, tapping his pen against the notepad. This is bad, Tony. Worse than I thought. If someone's blackmailing Laura, it means they've got leverage on her, and on you, by extension. We need to figure out who's behind this and what they want. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. What do we do next? Frank took a sip of his coffee, his eyes narrowing as he considered their options. First, we need to trace those messages. Find out who's sending them and what they're using to communicate. Then, we start digging into Liam. There's more to this guy than meets the eye. If he's involved in something shady, we'll find out. I felt a glimmer of hope as I listened to Frank's plan. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a chance, however slim, of regaining control of my life. But as they continued to discuss their strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something much bigger, something that would change everything. I didn't know what lay ahead, but with Frank by my side, I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. My life had become a whirlwind of secrecy and suspicion. With Frank's help, I began to untangle the complex web that Laura and Liam had spun. The more we dug, the clearer it became that this was not just a simple affair, it was something far more sinister. Frank had started by tracing the encrypted messages on Laura's phone. It was a meticulous process, one that required time and patience, two things I was quickly running out of. But Frank was methodical, combing through the data with the precision of a surgeon. Finally, after hours of work, he hit pay dirt. "They're using a burner phone," Frank explained one evening, as we sat in my study, the glow of the computer screen casting long shadows across the room. "Whoever's sending these messages is careful, but not careful enough. We've got a location." I leaned in, my heart pounding. "Where?" "An old warehouse on the edge of town," Frank replied, pointing to a spot on the map that was displayed on the screen. "It's abandoned, been that way for years. Perfect place to conduct shady business." The implication was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't just blackmailing Laura. They were operating out of the shadows, using the warehouse as a base of operations. The thought sent a chill down my spine. This was bigger than I had imagined. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to be careful," Frank warned, his tone serious. "This isn't just about confronting Laura anymore. We're dealing with dangerous people. Tony, we need to approach this smartly." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I had come too far to back down now. "Let's go," I said, standing up. "I need to see this for myself." Frank hesitated, but finally agreed. We armed ourselves with a small camera and a recorder, tools that Frank had used many times before in his line of work. The plan was simple: stake out the warehouse, gather evidence, and confront whoever was behind this once and for all. The drive to the warehouse was tense, the silence in the car thick with anticipation. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind this? What did they want? And more importantly, how did Laura get involved in something so dangerous? When we arrived, the warehouse loomed ahead of us, a hulking mass of concrete and steel, its windows dark and lifeless. We parked a safe distance away, hidden from view, and settled in for the stakeout. Hours passed, the darkness deepening around us. Frank was patient, his eyes never leaving the building. I, on the other hand, struggled to keep my anxiety at bay. Every creak of the car, every rustle of the wind set my nerves on edge. Finally, as the night crept towards dawn, movement caught our attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking briskly towards the warehouse. Frank grabbed the camera, snapping pictures as I strained to see who it was. The figure paused at the entrance, glancing around as if to ensure they weren't being watched. Satisfied, they pulled out a key and unlocked the door. Slipping inside, "Did you get it?" I whispered, my voice tight with tension. Frank nodded, lowering the camera. "Yeah, I got it. Let's wait a bit longer, see if anyone else shows up." But no one did. After another hour of waiting, we decided to call it a night. The drive back was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Back at my house, we reviewed the photos. The quality wasn't great, but it was enough to make out the figure. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized who it was. Liam. It was him, slipping into the warehouse in the dead of night. But what was he doing there? And why? I felt a surge of anger, followed by a cold realization. This wasn't just about Laura. Liam was involved in something much darker, something that had the potential to destroy not just my marriage, but everything I held dear. "We need more," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't enough. We need to know what's going on inside that warehouse." Frank agreed. "We'll need to get inside, find out what they're hiding. But we can't rush this, Tony. We have to be smart." I nodded, but inside, I felt the urgency pressing down on me. Whatever was happening, it was reaching a boiling point, and I knew that if we didn't act soon, it might be too late. I couldn't shake the image of Liam slipping into the warehouse. It haunted me, gnawed at me like a festering wound. The betrayal was one thing, but this was something far darker, something that went beyond infidelity. I knew we were on the brink of discovering something that could change everything, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead filled me with dread. Frank, ever the professional, insisted we take our time. Rushing in without a plan is the quickest way to get yourself killed. He'd warned me, but I was done waiting. The truth was so close I could taste it, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. A few days later, under the cover of darkness, we made our move. Frank had managed to procure a pair of old maintenance uniforms, disguises that would allow us to slip into the warehouse undetected. My heart pounded as we approached the building, the night air thick with tension. The warehouse loomed above us, a silent sentinel guarding whatever secrets it held. Frank picked the lock on the side door with practiced ease, and we slipped inside, the darkness swallowing us whole. The interior was cold, damp, and filled with the musty scent of neglect. But as we moved deeper into the building, it became clear that this place wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. Stacks of crates lined the walls, some marked with strange symbols, others unmarked entirely. The floor was littered with debris, but there was a path worn through the dust, evidence of recent activity. My nerves were on edge, every sound magnified in the silence. We moved cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. Frank led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gloom as we navigated the maze of crates and abandoned machinery. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Finally, we reached a large metal door at the back of the warehouse. It was old, rusted in places, but still sturdy. Frank paused, glancing back at me with a questioning look. I nodded, my resolve firm. Frank turned the handle slowly, wincing as it creaked in protest. The door swung open, revealing a small room bathed in the soft glow of computer monitors. The room was surprisingly clean, a stark contrast to the rest of the warehouse. But it wasn't the monitors that caught my attention, it was the man sitting in front of them. Liam. He was hunched over the desk, his focus entirely on the screens in front of him. My anger flared, but Frank held up a hand, signaling for silence. We crept closer, our presence masked by the hum of the machines. I strained to see what was on the screens, and what I saw sent a chill down my spine. Financial records, legal documents, all linked to the construction company. My company, and in the middle of it all, Laura's name. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just blackmail. This was a full-scale operation to take me down, to strip me of everything I had built. Liam was the mastermind behind it all. The affair, the warehouse, the documents, it was all part of a larger scheme. One designed to ruin me and take control of the company. Frank moved swiftly, stepping up behind Liam and clamping a hand over his mouth before he could react. Liam's eyes went wide with shock, his body stiffening as Frank restrained him. I stepped forward, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and fear. "Why, Liam?" My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "Why do this? Why betray your own family?" Liam struggled against Frank's grip, his eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and fear. But he didn't speak, didn't offer any explanation. My mind raced as I tried to process everything: Liam's betrayal, Laura's involvement, the implications of what I had just discovered. Finally, Frank released Liam, pushing him into the chair with a force that left no room for resistance. "Start talking," Frank demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Liam glared at me, his defiance slowly crumbling under the weight of the situation. "You wouldn't understand," he spat, his voice laced with bitterness. "You've always had everything handed to you. I had to fight for what little I got." My heart sank. I had suspected jealousy, but this was hatred, pure and simple. "So you decided to take what I've built?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "To destroy my life because of your petty grudges?" Liam's silence was all the confirmation I needed. He had been played, manipulated by someone he had considered family. The realization hit him hard, leaving him breathless. "Get up," Frank ordered, pulling Liam to his feet. "We're taking you to the police. You're going to answer for this." But before we could move, the door behind us creaked open. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. A figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. It wasn't until they stepped into the light that I recognized who it was. Laura. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock as she took in the scene before her. "Tony, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt the weight of the world crashing down on me. This was it, the moment of truth. I had discovered the conspiracy, the betrayal, but at what cost? The room felt as if it had been frozen in time. I stood motionless, my mind spinning as I tried to comprehend the scene unfolding before me. Laura, the woman I had loved and trusted, now stood before me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and something else, fear. Liam's defiance had crumbled the moment Laura appeared. He slumped in his chair, his gaze flicking between me and Laura, as if trying to gauge what would happen next. Frank, ever vigilant, kept his grip firm on Liam's shoulder, ready to act at the slightest hint of trouble. "Laura, what the hell is going on?" My voice cracked with the weight of betrayal and confusion. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Laura took a hesitant step forward, her hands trembling. "Tony, I never meant for any of this to happen," she began, her voice quivering with guilt. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." My eyes narrowed, my anger boiling over. "You never meant for this to happen? Laura, I trusted you. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for, what? For this?" I gestured toward Liam, who sat silently, his face pale. Laura's breath hitched as tears welled up in her eyes. I was trapped, Tony, she whispered. Liam, he convinced me that this was the only way. That we had no choice. But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of her words pressing down on me. No choice? What the hell are you talking about? I struggled to keep my voice steady, but the emotions were too raw. Too powerful. Laura hesitated, glancing at Liam before speaking again. It started with the blackmail. Liam, he found out something about the company, something that could ruin us all. He used it to manipulate me, to get what he wanted. I didn't know what to do, Tony. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? My voice was full of incredulity. By betraying me? By helping him try to destroy everything I've worked for? Laura flinched at the harshness of my tone, but she didn't back down. I didn't know what else to do, she admitted, her voice breaking. He threatened to go public, to expose everything. I thought I could control it, keep it from getting out of hand. But I was wrong, Tony. I was so wrong. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought to keep my anger in check. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they formed a picture I never wanted to see. Liam had used Laura's fear and desperation against her, turning her into a pawn in his twisted game. Frank, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke up. Liam, what did you have on Laura? His voice was cold, calculated. He knew that getting Liam to talk would be key to understanding the full extent of what they were dealing with. Liam looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. You wouldn't understand, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Try me, Frank pressed, tightening his grip on Liam's shoulder. Liam hesitated, then finally sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. It was the finances, he admitted. I found out that the company's finances were less than clean. I knew if I exposed it, it would ruin everything. But I didn't want to just destroy it, I wanted to take control. I thought if I could get Laura on my side, I could use her to take over the company. My heart sank as the truth hit me like a freight train. Liam had been planning this for a long time, meticulously plotting his takeover, using Laura as his unwitting accomplice. And Laura, she had fallen into his trap, believing that she was protecting her husband when she was really helping to dismantle everything they had built together. And the affair? My voice was cold, the anger still simmering beneath the surface. Liam didn't meet my eyes. That was just leverage, something to keep her in line, to make sure she did what I wanted. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Everything I had suspected, everything I had feared, it was all true. Liam had manipulated Laura, used her, and in doing so, had ripped my life apart. Laura's sobs broke the silence, her guilt and shame overwhelming her. Tony, please, I never wanted this. I just wanted to keep you safe, to protect what we had. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. I closed my eyes, the pain of her words cutting deep. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, but the betrayal was too great, the wounds too fresh. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. Frank, sensing the tension, finally stepped forward. We need to go to the police, Tony, he said quietly. This isn't something we can handle on our own. We need to expose Liam and make sure he pays for what he's done. I nodded slowly, my mind still reeling from everything I had just learned. You're right, I murmured, my voice hollow. We need to end this. But as we prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, something crucial. The truth had been laid bare, but it felt incomplete, as if there was still one more piece of the puzzle yet to be uncovered. As we stepped out into the cold night air, I glanced back at Laura, her tear-streaked face a haunting reminder of the life we once had. I didn't know what the future held for us, or if there even was a future anymore. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive to the police station was silent, each of us lost in our own turmoil. Beside me, Laura's hands trembled, her eyes swollen from crying, reflecting her turmoil and guilt. Frank, vigilant in the backseat, kept his eyes on the road, while Liam, the once loyal nephew turned villain, awaited the police at the warehouse. The weight of the revelations was almost unbearable. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, illuminating the bleakness of our situation, I parked and faced Laura. Her plea was a whisper, Tony. But I cut her off, not now, Laura. We need to handle this first. We entered the station and recounted everything to the detectives, the affair, the blackmail, the plot against my company. Laura remained silent, her gaze fixed on the ground, as the reality of our shattered life hung heavy in the room. Detective Harris assured us, "We'll take it from here." The weight of the past few days, the betrayal, the lies, the threat to everything I had built, was overwhelming. As Laura and I left the station, the new day cast harsh light on our altered world. We walked to the car, the distance between us more palpable than ever. At the car, Laura's apology broke the silence. "I'm so sorry, Tony. I thought I was protecting us, but I was wrong," she sobbed. The mix of anger and sorrow within me tightened my chest. "I need time, Laura," I managed, my voice laden with emotion. "I don't know what happens next." Laura nodded, tears marking her agreement. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." The drive home passed in a blur, my mind a whirlwind of the betrayal and its fallout. Upon arrival, I sat in the driveway, immobilized by a flood of memories housed within the walls of the home Laura and I built together. She reached out, touching my arm gently. "Tony, whatever happens, I'm sorry. For everything." Her words lingered as she exited the car and walked towards the house, her figure a silhouette of regret and sadness. I remained seated, the engine's cool ticking a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The warmth of the sun did nothing to ease the chill enveloping my heart. I needed to step inside, to face whatever lay ahead, but the house felt as foreign as the emotions battling within me. This ordeal wasn't over, not by a long shot, but as I finally entered the house, I was overwhelmed by the uncertainty of our future. Would I ever find it in me to forgive? Could our life together be mended, or was it irrevocably broken? If anyone has faced something similar, your insights would be invaluable. How do you rebuild after such profound betrayal? Is there a path through the pain, or is it a wound too deep to heal? Please, share your thoughts.